Hello, everyone, and welcome to NLP and the Coronavirus Day 43. And we're still going through the 7 universal laws from the Kybalion by the 3 initiates. And we had law number 1, which was everything is mind, or the law of mentalism. Then we had number 2, which was the law of correspondence, that there is a correspondence between all things, everything, and everybody. We had then law number 3, which was the law of vibration or frequency. Then yesterday we had the law of polarity, of dichotomies and duality. And now we've got law number 5, the law of cycles and rhythms. And, it's interesting that these laws are integrating as we move up from number 1 to number 7. And particularly it seemed that a lot of you loved the one that we did last night on the law of polarity and my explanation from the electronics idea. And a number of you said that's made it like really simple. So I'm going to continue that particular theme of using the correspondence between the 7 universal laws and electronics, electricity, electromagnetics this evening, again, to make these concepts simple for you to understand. Though, I find it really fascinating that, the Hermetic mysteries can be traced back thousands of years before, apparently, electricity was discovered by Benjamin Franklin and his kite, and before electromagnetic waves were discovered by Maxwell. So let's look at now the laws of cycles and rhythms. All the laws of cycles and rhythms says is that everything is in cycles, everything's in rhythms. And so, we've got the cycle of day and night as the earth goes around the sun. We've got the cycle of the month as the moon goes around the earth. We've got the cycle of the year as the earth goes around the sun. So everything is cycles and rhythms. We've got the tides. The tide comes in and then the tide goes out. I'm very close to that here because the tide goes in and out just outside my house here because I'm on a tidal part of the River Thames. So I see the water going up and down and up and down. So that's the law of cycles and rhythms, but it ties together the law of polarity and the law of vibration. Then if we bring in the law of correspondence, that all of these things correspond with each other, then we start to get some really powerful ideas. Because everything goes in cycles and rhythms. So if we have rapport, if you like, with the cycle and rhythm and go with the cycle and rhythm, then things will be really easy for us. But if we attempt to fight the cycle and rhythm, things are going to be tough for us. So as an example, one of the things I always think about with this is like surfers, when you see people who are surfing, what they've got to do is they've got to paddle out on their surfboard first, and they're going against the flow. They're going against the cycle. They're going against the waves. Then, once they've paddled out, which takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of energy for them to do that, then they wait for the big wave. Then what they do is they ride that wave. Now they're going with the cycle, and they come in very, very easily, very, very effortlessly, and also very, very quickly back to the shore again. That's what happens when you recognize the law of cycles and rhythms and use the law of cycles and rhythms for you rather than you fighting against it. So going into our electronics, we explained this a little bit yesterday. So here's our cycle and rhythm. Night and day, months, years, whatever. And we have our polarity. So for there to be a cycle, there needs to be a polarity of going up to the positive, then the negative, back up to the positive again, then the negative again, then the positive again, and the negative again. That's where polarity fits into this. Then vibration or frequency is how quickly we go through an entire cycle, starting out here, going into the positive, going back into the negative, and back to our start position again. That's the amount of time it takes for that. The less time it takes for it, or what's called the wavelength, the distance here, then the higher the frequency. If you think of it this way, think of it as a pendulum swinging from one side to the other side. That's what you've got with the law of cycles and rhythms. It's like a pendulum. And the quicker the pendulum swings, then the higher the frequency is. The lower the pendulum swings, then the lower the frequency is. Now, this distance here from the height of the positive to the height of the negative is called the amplitude or the voltage. So the bigger the swing of the pendulum, the greater the amplitude or the greater the voltage of the energy that's coming through. Now, as we mentioned yesterday when we talked about, batteries, positive pole, negative pole, when there is a circuit between the negative pole and the positive pole, then the energy can flow. And if you think about it like, if you think of the energy or the electricity being in a pipe or a wire, like a piece of wire is the equivalent of a pipe for electricity, whereas compared to a pipe for water, then the amount of the flow, as in the speed of the flow or the pressure of the flow, is called the push behind it is called the current, as measured in amps. Yeah, and the power behind that energy is the multiplication of the amplitude times the amount of push. So the higher the voltage and the higher the push or the current, the more power there is there. There's more power in the energy. Now, here's one thing I find quite fascinating with this, because obviously what we're talking about here is about electricity. When we talk about correspondence, we're talking about electromagnetism. We'll look at that in a little bit more detail in a moment. So the Kybalion and the Hermetic Mysteries, because we can actually trace these back to before the Kybalion. The Kybalion was written in the early 1900s, but they didn't invent the seven mysteries or the seven laws. That we can trace those significantly further back than before electricity was discovered or electromagnetism was discovered, and also the idea of electromagnetic waves were discovered. So what we know is that what they're talking about in the Kybalion has to be that they were talking about what we would call in electricity alternating current rather than direct current. So alternating current is what you get out of your mains socket, and direct current is what you get out of a battery. Now, the major difference between the two is that with direct current and a battery, it runs out. There's a point in time when all of the energy is drained out of that battery and you throw it away and you go and buy another one and fit it in. Yeah. Whereas with alternating current, you've got a continuous source of energy. Now, again, many of you know that I'm a big fan of Nikola Tesla. And Tesla was the person who discovered alternating current. Until Tesla came along and actually discovered alternating current, what we were using from an electricity point of view is DC. We were using DC current. We were using DC current to light our houses, buildings, etc., but rather than AC. And then Tesla went and discovered AC, and there were some major benefits to using AC. And there was a bit of a war, an AC-DC war. That's like the rock band AC/DC. Bit of an AC-DC war, and ultimately, in a lot of contexts, AC won. But it was Nikola Tesla who discovered that. And if you read a lot of Nikola Tesla's material, he is using the 7 Hermetic laws, but applying them, correspondence, to electricity and electromagnetism, which I find fascinating, that these correlations between the two. But everything goes through polarity, and everything goes through vibration. Everything goes through correspondence, and everything goes through cycles and rhythms. So, for instance, let's say you've got 2 people that come together, and when they first come together, there is a polarity between them, and opposite poles attract. So they move closer together. But then when they become closer together and they unify, now the polarity is collapsed because they both have the same polarity. And same poles repel. So now they're pushed apart. But as they push apart, then they get their different polarities back, and now they're attracted again. But now their polarities are the same, and they're repelled again. Remember magnets, when you were a kid, you got 2 magnets, you got the opposite poles, they stuck together. If you attempted to put a north pole with a north pole, they were pushed apart. This is like magnets, right? So north and south, then both become north, then both become north and south, so they move in and out. But moving in and out like that is the law of cycles and rhythms. So if you have a high need for things to stay the same, for there to be a stasis, if you like, the law of cycles and rhythms says that's not possible. There's a certain point where you're going to be fighting. You're going to be fighting to keep these things apart. But they're going to do that. Now you're going to be fighting to keep things together. But they're going to do that anyway. But as soon as you realize that there's this law of cycles and rhythms, and you're happy to go along with the laws of cycles and rhythms, then things become very, very easy. Yeah. Now, here's another interesting thing I just thought of when I was, reading the chapter and thinking about the correspondences that I could use to explain these things in possibly a modern way, metaphor, if you like. Is, a while ago, people kept coming and asking me, David, what do you think's going to happen to the financial markets? And I'm thinking, what are you asking me for? I'm an NLP trainer. And before that, I was software engineering. Before that, I was into electronics. What are you asking me for? But then I thought, well, there's this law of cycles and rhythms, amplitude, frequency, all of these kind of things. So when I looked at what had happened historically with the markets, if you like, or the economy, and I actually plotted it, I found an interesting thing. Because what I found was that when we first started kind of like measuring the economy, then the frequency was quite high. But the amplitude, the difference between the high and the low, was quite small. Yeah. So, it got to the point where maybe you go through an entire, what would be called a bull market or a bear market, every 2 to 3 years. But the difference between the height of the bull and the height of the bear was quite small. But then when I looked as we came up closer and closer and closer to the current day, what I noticed was that the amplitude, the difference between the high and the low, got bigger, and the frequency got lower. Yeah. So there was a bigger time span between the highs. There was a bigger time span between the lows. And when I looked at that, then all we could actually say from this was, because of the laws of cycles and rhythms, because of what we've got with vibration, is that at some point in time, couldn't exactly predict when. If I'd really got my electronics engineer hat on, then maybe I could have done. It was going to be, we didn't know whether we were at the top of the positive cycle, but there was a point where it was going to peak, and then it was going to go down to the bottom of the negative cycle, and the low was going to be lower in comparison than any of the lows before. The amplitude between the high and the low, the difference between the high and the low, was going to be bigger than it ever had been before. And it was kind of like overdue because it was a bit longer length of time between the high and the low than ever before. So it was going to be that just by the laws of cycles and rhythms, we were going to have a big dip in the economy, a big dip in the market. Now what we've got is the media saying that it's going to be the biggest depression of the last 200-300 years or something like that. Yeah. But that was kind of predictable from these 7 universal laws. The only thing we couldn't predict is when it was going to happen. And we could definitely say it's going to happen, and it's going to be the biggest shift in the economy that we've ever experienced before. Now, the upside to that is because of the law of cycles and rhythms, there's an upside to everything. So what we do know is that when this thing bottoms out, it's going to start coming back up again, and it's going to go higher than it's ever done before. And that cycle is going to be longer than any cycle we've had before. So it's kind of like it's going to be a bigger boom cycle, and it's going to be a longer boom cycle than we've ever experienced before, applying the laws from the Kybalion written in the early 1900s. I think that's absolutely fascinating, which is why I say, be ready for that. For when it turns, there's going to be some major, major, major opportunities for the people that are prepared, the people that are educated, and the people that know this kind of thing. But then if we tie in with all of this, the law of correspondence, then I talked about yesterday about this idea of a transformer, where we put a alternating current, a vibrating energy into this side of the transformer. And what we'll do is we'll get a corresponding vibrating energy out of this side. Yeah, that's correspondence. And the frequency in is equal to the frequency out. Yeah. But you'll notice that both of these here are the same size. If we reduce the size of that, then the amplitude coming out is lower. So if that was half the size, you get half the amplitude coming out. But because you put power in, you would have twice the push, twice the current. What Nikola Tesla did was he did it the other way around. And what he did was he made this one very, very small and this one very, very big. And so what he could do, particularly when he was using high frequency is required for this, he could literally put a small voltage in here and get a huge voltage out here. which meant he could actually create man-made lightning. And for a long time, it was actually believed that lightning was direct current. But then with the advent of high-speed photography, then actually lightning goes from the earth upwards. Although it appears to come down, it doesn't. It goes from the energy goes from the earth upwards, and it does it in a spiral, as in it has a frequency, it has a vibration. Yep. Nature works on AC, nature works on frequency and vibration. So correspondence between all things. So our body, we know, is electromagnetic. Medicine these days measures the electric current in our body. If you've had a electrocardiogram, then the heart runs on an electric current. If you have an electroencephalogram, then there's frequencies, electrical frequencies in the brain. We can now start to measure the magnetic field that comes out from the body. And whereas I think a lot of people believe that the biggest electromagnetic field, more correctly, would be from here, from the brain. But in actual fact, the largest electromagnetic field, and the one that extends furthest from the body, actually comes from the heart. So if we are looking at how we want to develop ourselves to be able to use the 7 Hermetic laws in our life, then our wiring, our circuitry is our nervous system. And we know our nervous system is electromagnetic as well as chemical. So what do we want to do? Well, the thing we want to do is to culture our nervous system to be able to take energy of higher and higher frequencies. One of the best ways of doing that is actually through meditation. And that actually enables us to be able to hold higher frequency electricity in our body and be able to become aware of higher and higher frequencies. Then also, we want to be able to increase the amount of voltage that our nervous system can carry, as in between the highs and the lows as it shifts from one polarity to another. And as I mentioned, we have a pole in each of us. We've got the positive pole and the negative pole. As I mentioned before, that's just the polarity. It's not the use of the word positive being good and negative being bad. Then we want to be able to culture the nervous system, be able to carry more and more current, because the greater the amplitude and the greater the current, the more power we have. Yeah. And I'm taking power there from using a correspondence. Power for me would be your ability to take action or your ability to create results. And one of the best ways of actually culturing your nervous system to carry more and more current is weight training. Because, as you lift heavier and heavier weights, then the nerve force that's causing the muscles to contract has to be at a higher and higher current to be able to carry that power, to be able to contract the muscles with that amount of force. So these are ways that we can actually culture and nurture our own nervous system, so that then, using law number 1, the law of mentalism, we can actually then create results in ourselves and in our external environment using the 7 Hermetic laws. So thanks for joining me again. I hope this was useful. Please put in the comments if you've got any questions. If you like it, if this is working for you, great, because that keeps me going. That's brilliant. And We'll be back with law number 6 on Tuesday. Yeah, because we've got a holiday weekend here in the UK, which is obviously is going to make a huge difference because, I think actually for this holiday, I think I'm probably going to, I think I'm going to stay at home. Actually, I think I'm going to stay in. So anyway, it's the holiday weekend here. So have a great holiday weekend wherever you are. If you've got a holiday weekend, if you haven't, just have a great weekend. And we'll see you again on Tuesday. Wherever you are in the world, love you lots, and ahui ho.